After I did the post photo, a different experience.
Right.
Sheila, you can sit there as well if you like. Yep. Yep, but there's plenty more room. That way.
Good evening everyone, the library is now closed unless of course you're here for our capital crimes event. Otherwise, could you please exit the library immediately? Thank you.
Welcome everyone to Karori Library. We're really happy to host this event tonight, Wellington City Libraries, in conjunction with the Ngaio Marsh Awards. I know that everyone's really excited to hear from the writers about crime and mystery. So I'll just do a quick health and safety. If there's an earthquake, we just drop, cover and hold. If we need to evacuate the building, we'll just go out the front doors, across the square and onto the ramp. And we'll just wait there. The toilets, we just go out the front door and then beside the cafe. So welcome, and I hope you enjoy everything. I'm going to pass over to my colleague Neil Johnston to introduce everyone.
Welcome everyone. Welcome to this, the first in our two Ngaio Marsh Awards events. The next one's at Newtown Library on the 30th of April. But as of today, if you like crime fiction, you're in for a real treat. But tonight we have with us four highly acclaimed local storytellers to talk about their work. On the panel tonight we have Rajorshi Chakraborti, author of 6 novels. He was longlisted for the 2019 Occams. His latest spellbinding novel, Shakti, is a supernatural mystery thriller set in India. Next we have Helen Vivienne Fletcher, poet, playwright, teacher, children's and young adult author. Helen was shortlisted for the Ngaio Marsh Awards in 2018 for Broken Silence. Next we have Rodney Strong. Rodney left his day job in 2016 to follow his lifelong dream of being a writer. He has now published 10 novels for children and adults, including 4 ghostly hitchhiker mysteries and 3 Silver Moon retirement village mysteries. And our panel chair for tonight is Jennifer Vivienne. Jennifer is a copywriter, short story writer, and author of All Our Secrets. Won the 2018 Ngaio Marsh Award for the best first novel. A very warm Karori Library welcome to you all. And I now pass the baton on to
Hello. Thank you, Neil, and you introduced everyone, which I was about to do, so you saved me doing that. But welcome, everyone. It's great to be here. The Ngaio Marsh Awards, which are named after New Zealand's most famous crime writer, celebrate excellence in crime, mystery and thriller writing by New Zealand authors. These awards are quite broad. They encompass a lot more than traditional detective or police procedural type crime novels. And the books we're focusing on today are good examples of the variety of stories the awards highlight. Broken Silence, which is by Helen, is centred around troubled 17-year-old Kelsey, who after caring for her ill mum and being abandoned by her dad, is living in her brother's flat and being abused by her boyfriend when she starts receiving disturbing phone calls from a stranger. Rodney's Hip, Flask and Hanging stars 97-year-old Alice Atkinson, who is a retired con artist. An encounter with a ghost from her past means she has to deal with unfinished business while also solving a mystery at the retirement home. Shakti's heroine, Jaya, is a school teacher who also writes an agony column for teenagers under a male pseudonym. Her story starts when she receives a letter from a 15-year-old girl who has been gifted a dangerous power that lets her make anything happen, including hurling another girl off a balcony before raising her again. Now, I'd be interested to know whether the three of you consider your books to be crime books. Will we start with you, Raj?
Here everyone, and most of all, thank you very much to the library for hosting us.
Do you want to
And kind of eating into your weekend and the start of your weekend. And thank you all so much, likewise, for coming at the start of the weekend. It's wonderful to see you and to be here. In my case, this is so. As Jennifer pointed out, at the one of the things I've always loved about crime fiction is not just the atmosphere, but also the many storytelling hooks, the kind of classic storytelling hooks that keep you reading, that draw you in and keep you reading. And in my writing, I've often borrowed from them. So, for example, here the book begins with a kind of unexplained murder that then you only realize the connection to the main story quite a bit later, and then there's another death and so on. So it borrows very much from both the atmosphere, and it borrows some of the kind of storytelling strategies from crime fiction. But it's more than that. It's another kind of crime fiction. It's not a procedural, which I love. I love procedurals. It's not true crime. But maybe it has some relationship to a particular subgenre of crime writing and mystery writing, in which ordinary people who hitherto have had no relationship to crime are suddenly plunged into extraordinary adventures. So, for example, Hitchcock is a master of that. It's where a man answers a phone call in a hotel foyer and gets mistaken for a spy, and that's the start of North by Northwest. So I've always really loved that, where ordinary people going about their day are suddenly plunged into something extraordinary. So this book borrows from that as well. And the final aspect of crime writing that it borrows from is crime in both a micro sense as well as a macro sense. And what I mean by that is that very great crime writing, and I've tried to learn from that, not only answers your questions about who committed a particular crime and who did it and how they went about it, but it also kind of sheds light on many wider contexts. What kind of society is it in which such a crime is more likely? What were the pressures acting on the characters? And really great crime writing, fictional or true crime, can really bring out that wider portrait of the society in which this story happened. and I've tried to learn from that as well. So.
Thank you. That's a good answer. Rodney.
No. I mean, it's a crime book in that murder is a crime and murder takes place. But I mean, I was brought up with the traditional crime books, the hard-boiled detectives and that sort of thing. So from that perspective, no. But sort of adding on from what Raj was saying, it is about people that are kind of just thrust into this role of being a detective, whether willingly or unwillingly, and they have to solve a crime. So I find that more interesting because I think it grounds the characters a bit more, and then I think people can relate to those characters a bit more because it could be anybody. And in this case, the character happens to be a 97-year-old retired con artist who's a bit bored with life, but she's never solved a crime in her life until the first one in the series. So even for her at that age, it was suddenly she's forced to kind of take on this role. So from that point of view, it's definitely crime, but it is more in the vein of, I guess, and the English writers do this very well. The Agatha Christie. So it's the Miss Marple kind of thing where a lot of the time they just stumble on something and then decide out of stubbornness or whatever other traits that they're going to actually solve this crime because they can do it better than the police. So it's sort of that kind of a little bit humorous, the more recent ones, so the Agatha Raisin for those people that watch those sort of shows. It's the kind of little bit of humour, a little bit lighter than what I would call the sort of traditional gritty crime, which you see a lot of on TV or read a lot of still. So yeah.
I agree with that. And Helen, what's your book?
No, I don't think I ever considered that I was writing crime until coming into the Ngaio Marsh environment where the definition of crime is a lot broader. I think I tend to know what genre I'm writing until other people read it and name it as a mystery, or in the case of Broken Silence, some people will call it thriller, some people will call it horror. The only thing I knew for certain that I was writing was young adult, and within that just depends on the reader a little bit as to where. I guess that's the same with a lot of books really, but the readers define what it is unless you're writing very specifically to particular genre tropes. But for the most part, I think it's once it's finished you decide what it is.
Yeah, I agree with that too. So while they're all very different, what Broken Silence, Hip Flask and Hanging and Shakti all have in common is that they're page turners. Like they're all very fast paced, even 97-year-old Alice. She acts very swiftly, and they have carefully constructed, tight plots. So I wanted to ask the three of you whether you started with the plot and created characters to bring it to life, or did you start with the characters? Or perhaps, in Raj's case, it could have been the setting, and did the plot naturally evolve from that? Oh, yes.
In my case, I definitely started with this idea of people who were finding that suddenly their most secret longings that they hadn't even expressed to themselves, were magically being granted. And how would that be? And it's a classic fairy tale device, because above all it allows us to explore areas of great human folly. Like suddenly when desires are being granted and those limits are removed, both in terms of temptation and in terms of the price that is asked, so I wanted to explore that. But the other thing that led to this book is very much, it's something kind of extra literary, by which I mean it's a particular moment that India, my home country, is kind of going through and has been going through the past 7 years or so. It's a politically transformational time where we have a government who is over time actually trying to change the very nature of our country and make it from being, at least nominally, a secular democratic republic in which everyone feels they can belong equally. Of course, that is not the case on the ground, but nominally it's what the Constitution says. It's seeking to try and move that to a country where people of one community or the majority religion feel that this country belongs to them more than it does to others, and others should live subordinate to them and feel as second-class citizens. And that project, both on a kind of grand political level, but also on the level, on an everyday street level of people from different minorities being intimidated and being kind of, being made to feel they don't belong, has made such an impression on many people in India, even those who are not in India like myself, that it was a need to respond to this moment in Indian history, after which our country might not be what it has been so far, that made me write this book. So while it is a mystery, and while hopefully you're gripped by a story and what happens to these people, it's also trying to shed a light on a really transformational political project that we're going through at the moment.
Rodney.
So in my case, Hit Flask and Hanging is the second book in the series, so the characters were already there. So I started with the characters in place. Although, the more books you go into a series, the more you can kind of explore those characters and bring some of the minor characters forward a bit more. So for this particular one, I definitely started, the characters were there, the retirement village was there, and then it became, what mischief can I get them into that's going to move the story along. So yeah, it was a little bit of the opposite thing from
Well, I'm very much a plot and dialogue writer, so when I start writing, the characters I might know gender and age, but that's about it. And I have to work a bit harder to make sure my characters are fully fleshed out, because I get too excited about the plot. In this case, I had come up with the plot maybe 10 years before I actually started writing it. So I had all the plot very fleshed out in my mind, though the ending did change, because as I was writing it, I realised that what I thought was a genius, very unresolved ending was actually just going to be incredibly unsatisfying for the reader. And as amazing as I thought I was with this very, very, very bleak ending, to be honest, that wasn't going to fly if anyone outside my head read it. So that part did change.
Now I want to know what the author
Yeah.
I can't really spoil it.
Yeah, no, it's close enough to the ending that's in there that it would spoil things.
Right.
I'll tell you after.
Maybe probably.
Yeah.
But I thought now would be a good time to give the audience a taste of your books. If you'd each like to read an excerpt.
Sure.
Do you have a
First?
yeah, here we could start there.
How long should we do?
2 or 3 minutes.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, we can do it. I have enough trouble turning the pages with 2 hands as it is. So. Yeah, sure, it'll be fine.
It's nothing like building tension.
Yeah. I think that will be sit forward. Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right. So this is from the beginning of Broken Silence. Because she's your daughter. I don't open my eyes when I hear Pete say that. For the past 20 minutes, I've been pretending to be asleep, listening to him yell down the phone at Dad. Of course, I'm only getting Pete's side of the conversation, but it's not hard to fill in the blanks. And whose fault is that? Pete shouts. I'm guessing Dad just played the fact that he's barely seen me in the last 10 years as a reason not to take me in. Parent of the Year, right there. Well, what am I supposed to tell her? That's a good question. What is Pete going to tell me? He obviously hasn't realised how thin the walls are, and I don't even want to think about the other implications of that. Whatever, I have to get to work. Pete slams the phone down and storms down the hallway. I flinch as the bathroom door crashes shut. Honestly, I'm not sure what Pete was expecting. Dad's not going to suddenly turn into someone who cares just because I've got no place to go. The phone rings again, making me jump. I stare at it. The light on the base blinks at me like it's sending Morse code. I'm annoyed at myself, but I feel a little squirm of hope that it might be Dad calling back to say he's changed his mind. I'll pick up if no one else has by the time it gets to 3 rings. 1, 2, Kelsey, Pete calls from the bathroom. Can you get the phone? I sigh and roll onto my side and reach for the receiver. Hello? I wait for an answer. Hello? Silence. Hello? Hello? Last chance. Still silence. Not Dad, I guess. Okay then. I put the phone down and flop back against my pillow. Directly above my bed, there's a brown leak stain on the ceiling the shape of Australia. At home, I'd be seeing the My Little Pony sticker pictures I stuck all over the walls when I was 7. Okay, of course I'm not into My Little Pony anymore, but still I miss them. Opening my eyes and seeing signs of decay is just depressing. My stomach hurts when I remember that I'll never wake up in my own room again. Instead, I'm here in Pete's dingy flat where everything is dirty and the wallpaper's just itching to peel off in long sheets like a lizard shedding its skin. Pete appears in my doorway. Who was it? Dunno, wrong number, I think. Pete hovers beside the bed, a tangle of overly tall gangliness. He's wearing his work shirt and tie but still has his pyjama pants on. It makes his already long arms look stretched like he's a balding orangutan in half a suit. Did you get hold of Dad? I ask. Pete hesitates, and I see it on his face a second before he says anything that he's going to lie. No, I just got the machine. I get out of bed and start gathering my stuff for school. Must be at work, I say. Must be. Pete avoids looking at me. So that was his answer phone you were yelling at for the last 20 minutes. What? Pete's eyes flick up to meet mine. He frowns, then a red flush shoots up his face. If you knew I was talking to him, then why act like, because you obviously weren't going to tell me. I didn't want to upset you. Yeah, well, you did a great job there. I turn away. Out of the corner of my eye, I watch the flush retreat back down his neck. Sorry, he says. I shove my books into my backpack instead of answering. He sighs. Kel, if you want to talk about any of this stuff, I don't. Yeah, but Pete clears his throat. If you ever do. He gives me his best sympathetic look. I feel myself soften. I don't need to talk, I say. But thanks. Pete nods, then he grins. Are we supposed to hug now or something? I scoff. No way. Go have a shower, you stink. Thanks, that's what I get for trying to be a caring brother. I poke my tongue out at him. He laughs. Hey, Ben and Aidan are making some breakfast. I roll my eyes. Protein shakes, I'm guessing. You could do with a bit of fattening up. He goes to squeeze my arm. Don't. I jerk away from him. He frowns, dropping his hand to his side. Sorry, I say. I hurt my arm at soccer. I pick at my nails as my cheeks grow hot. I don't think Pete notices. He nods and tilts his head towards the door. Come have some breakfast. Ben said he can give you a lift to school. I wait until Pete's gone and then close the door. My suitcase is wedged halfway under the bed. I pry it open to take some clothes out. It's stupid. I know I'm not going home, but still I can't bear to unpack. It makes it too permanent, too irreversible. I slip my pyjama top over my head, wincing as it brushes my arm. I see the bruises clearly as I look in the mirror. 5 small ones and 1 large one, like someone grabbed me with purple paint on their hand. I flick my hair across my shoulder so it covers the bruises and glare at my reflection.
Rodney, would you like to?
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's be all professional. So this is also from the start of this book. Are you sure she said to meet you here? Vanessa asked. Alice looked up at the front of the old brick railway station. Both it and she used to be a lot younger and shinier. You read the message, she replied. She said platform 9 at 10:30. They both looked at the giant clock above the main doors of the building. It was 10:20. Let's sit while we wait, Vanessa suggested. They walked a few paces to one of the bench seats that lined the walkway to the doors, and Alice eased herself down, stifling the groan that threatened to escape from her mouth. She'd never had a problem admitting she was getting old, but for Alice there was a difference between being old and feeling old, and lately she'd been feeling old. Simply walking around the Silverburn retirement village left her tired and achy. It didn't help that she was still recovering from someone trying to kill her, and that was months ago. The doctor had suggested she avoid strenuous activity for a while. Actually, what he'd said was, you're 97 years old, don't be in such a bloody hurry to die. With the life she'd led, it had never been a case of being in a hurry to die, more death popping in to knock on the front door occasionally. Alice looked at her companion. Vanessa's long brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her green eyes sparkled with humour that was never far below the surface. She could have been looking back through time at a younger version of herself. Alice was still as thin as the girl, although she suspected there were more muscles under Vanessa's work uniform than under her own pants and jersey. Vanessa Carson worked for the Silverburn Retirement Village as a concierge. Alice intended to change that. The girl was too smart and had too much potential to sit at the beck and call of residents with an average age 50 years older than her 23. Alice didn't think it would take much persuading. Vanessa was already showing signs of being restless, which is possibly why she jumped at the chance to escort Alice to the train station this morning. Lately, she seemed to spend more of her time with Alice than at her desk. Were you here when this was built? Vanessa asked, with a wave at the 3-storey building with a steady stream of people moving through the doors. Cheeky, Alice replied. Vanessa grinned and Alice shook her head in mock disgust. All right, yes I was. I was 15 when it opened. Vanessa's grin widened and Alice rolled her eyes. This is why I don't take you places. You just like reminding me how old I am, she grumbled. No one else is going to drive your grumpy butt, Vanessa laughed. The ever-present Wellington wind ruffled Alice's hair and she shivered. Though the sky was clear, there was no heat in the May sun. The short, cold days of winter were just around the corner. Alice looked up at the clock again. It was time to get moving. She had no idea why her granddaughter had asked to meet here, but given Amanda was in the same line of work Alice had been in, strange requests were not unusual. Alice and Vanessa made their way slowly through the high-ceilinged foyer and past the internal doors to the train platforms. Platform 9 was closest to the road, so they turned right and made their way around the corner onto the platform. Alice scanned the crowd, searching for Amanda, and from a lifetime of habit, for potential victims and threats. A few feet away, a man stood with his back to her. He looked vaguely familiar, which was a description she attributed to half the population. Oliver, she called out. The man turned and surprise flitted across his face before he nodded. Hello, Alice. I assume you're here for the same reason I am. I suspect so. She considered the implications of him being there. Amanda had been the one to first introduce them, and Alice knew that he'd helped her granddaughter out of a nasty situation recently in Australia. In a way, it made sense that he was here. What didn't make sense is why they were both there. Oliver, this is Vanessa. She drove me here. Vanessa thrust out her hand. You're Oliver Atkinson, the writer. Yes. Have you read my books? Oliver asked. Vanessa laughed. Oh no, I don't read. Not enough time. Alice saw a pained expression flash across Oliver's face. Then he said, I guess those real housewives won't watch themselves. Vanessa smiled at him. Are you here alone, Oliver? Alice asked. He nodded. Jennifer's at work and the kids are at school. Not quite what I meant, she tapped the side of her head. Oh, Oliver replied, his cheeks reddening. No. Am I missing something? Vanessa asked. Just an inside joke, dear, Alice told her. Before they could say anything else, a bus pulled up next to them and the doors swished open. A stream of cruise ship tourists stepped onto the pavement. Alice spotted the sign on the side saying the Emerald Princess, and it was cruise ship season. It didn't take a genius to put two and two together. She'd been on a cruise ship once, persuaded in her early 60s by a friend. It'd be one of the worst experiences of her life, stuck on a ship with a bunch of old people pretending they were still young by making fools of themselves. Still, the scenery had been spectacular, and with the pristine wilderness of Alaska had meant the trip wasn't a complete disaster. Someone jostled Alice's arm as they passed. The man turned his head and for a moment stared directly into her eyes as he mumbled an apology before continuing on his way. A deep chill ran through Alice as she watched him join two women, slipping his arms in between theirs. One of them said something and they all laughed. "What is it?" Vanessa asked. "We need to follow that man," Alice replied. "Why?" Vanessa turned to where Alice was looking. "Because he just stole my watch."
Raj.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm reading not the absolute beginning, there's a prologue, and then this is chapter 1 with the narrator speaking. And as Jennifer said, she is an agony aunt, but for reasons of her own, because she works at a very strict girls' school. She's a teacher at a very strict girls' school, and the school administration would disapprove of the kind of advice she dispenses in this column. She has to work under a male pseudonym, and that becomes clear a bit later. So what I'm going to read to you is one of the most startling letters to her column that this agony aunt, who is our narrator, has ever received. It started for me with this message 3 weeks ago, on Independence Day, as a matter of fact, Tuesday, the 15th of August. And here's the letter. "Sir, a friend told me about your column because I needed some advice. I love the answers with which you help people. But this letter is not for your column. Please, for my safety, do not publish it. Yet I would dearly love an answer from you. Sir, my problem is that I can bring about anything I want. And I mean anything. I began to be aware of it 9 days ago, and at first I believed I had become extremely lucky. But this isn't luck. Now I only feel afraid. I must sound crazy, first of all, for imagining that I can make anything happen, and secondly, for not feeling lucky about this. But let me give you an example. The incident that made up my mind to write to you. You will soon see the other reason why this cannot be made public. I behaved like a monster. I would be arrested. What I did was completely wrong, but I only dared to try it because I was so sure it would work. Because by now, I'm sure that I can bring about anything I want. There is a 15-year-old girl who comes after school to help her mother in our house. Her mother does our cooking, cleaning, and other housework. We live in a flat on the 5th floor. Yesterday afternoon, the girl had come into my room to sweep the floor, and when she was outside on the balcony, I suddenly picked her up, plunged her right down to the ground floor, and brought her back up again. All in one movement that took probably 30 seconds, maybe less. And I never moved from my bed. I accomplished all this with my mind, simply because I wanted to. The girl was unhurt, although absolutely terrified. This is the moment to mention that I too am a 15-year-old girl. In fact, I'm 7 weeks younger than the girl I hurled down and raised up 5 floors. Of course, she has no idea it was me. As I said, I remained throughout on my bed, sitting against the cushions, appearing to chat on my iPad. I know I sound mad, but if someone had been watching, either on the ground or from another building, or else from a balcony below or above us, they would have seen it all. What I had planned and then achieved was like the activity of bungee jumping, only without a rope. Imagine a bungee jump conducted on an unsuspecting person in which they themselves saw nothing, yet felt an irresistible force. My mind was that force. I executed the move perfectly, just as I'd come to expect after a week of wielding this gift. I would not have dared to attempt something so risky with someone else if I had not been 100% confident of pulling it off. I repeat, she was unhurt. But the tears and the terror that overcame her afterwards made a great impact on me. I realized to my shame that I had put 2 days of planning into the jump, thinking about the right time and the right person. Yet at no point had it occurred to me that, for example, this girl might suffer a heart attack. I had been so confident about bringing her back in one piece that I forgot to consider the other effects of the shock. Yesterday afternoon, she managed to run back into my room, away from the balcony, and collapsed on the floor. It took 20 minutes for her mother to get a story out of her. I pretended I'd seen nothing. In fact, I initiated the suggestion, taken up afterwards by everyone except the girl, that it must have been a touch of the afternoon sun. A dizzy spell, I argued, combined with being on the balcony, would have felt exactly like falling. Today, of course, she has stayed away. Her mother said she didn't go to school. Neither did I, although I'm in school uniform right now. But I'm in a cafe writing to you. If you're almost convinced that I'm mad, meet me before you make up your mind. Let me show you what I can do. How will you reply, sir? Right now, I'm dangerous to myself and to others, and I need your help. I don't recognize the person who planned yesterday's stunt so methodically and calmly. The entire time I thought of it as an experiment or a test. And the one thing she failed to see was another girl just like her. Yours sincerely, Shivani. P.S. I hope you understand the main reason why it would be so harmful to publish this letter. Can you imagine the flood of people who would try to contact me in the hope of fulfilling their wishes? So I stopped. Thank you.
Now I want to know about characters. Kelsey, Alice and Jaya are all very convincing and memorable, and interestingly, they're all strong female characters. So I thought I'd ask Rodney and Raj how easy or difficult it was to write from the point of view of a female character. So maybe Rodney, you can talk about that first.
Yeah, it is challenging, obviously, writing as any character that's not similar to yourself. But yeah, writing a member of the opposite sex has its own challenges. I mean, I guess I've been quite lucky in my life to have a number of wonderful female friends, and Alice lived to 97. Both my grandparents, my grandmothers made it to 100, and one got to 97. So I got to, I guess, have them in my life and observe them as well. Neither of them were con artists. not professional anyway, just a hobby. So, that's where the observation skills of a writer really come into it, is that just take note of how people want to interact. And I think a lot of the time the reactions that characters have are going to be similar in terms of male or female as a basic kind of human nature, and then it's just the subtleties and the variances that really just come from observing other people and seeing what they do and how they react to things, and kind of weaving that into the character that I'm building. So.
Did anyone read it for sort of accuracy? Like
Well, yeah, so I have, so my wife reads everything before it gets published. And I also have 2 or 3 sort of readers who read them before it goes to the editor stage, who are all women. And so I've never, fingers crossed, had anyone come back and go, don't be ridiculous, a woman would never react in that way. So either they are being kind, or I've managed to capture it relatively accurately so far.
How about you, Raj?
I think Rodney answered a substantial part of the question, where, you know, there are challenges to creating any character who is different from you. It could be another man, but of a very different background. So there are specific challenges to creating any character different from you, and it's one of the joys and one of the great challenges of writing fiction, which is to try and make alive people very different from you, and have them kind of in conflict or in contact with each other. So that's the first thing. And the second thing about observing, if you are going to create a woman of you know, in this case, if you a woman in her 30s, about drawing on all the experiences you have had with people. So, you know, that also plays a role. What I actually found, and this is definitely the book in which, this is the first book in which a woman protagonist tells the entire story, rather than just merely plays a substantial role in the story, but we see the story through her eyes. So that was also, you know, the first time I kind of dared to attempt that. What I found really, one thing I found really interesting that I hadn't anticipated at the start, is that once I kind of got into trying to see the world like Jaya, that did not feel, you know, that did not feel kind of incredibly difficult or close to impossible. I felt, okay, I felt I could create a plausible seeming kind of woman narrator, and then of course I was waiting for my first readers, among whom my partner and my mother play very crucial roles, and then all the women readers who've read it so far. You know, we kind of, one of the things I've been keeping my fingers crossed about in listening for feedback is whether the women felt alive and right for them, as Rodney said. But one thing I found interesting was that it wasn't as hard for me to create, or it didn't feel as hard to create Jaya from the inside as it was to remember how it would be for her to be perceived in an Indian street or in various Indian settings from the outside as a woman, as opposed to, you know, the men I had created so far. And so, for example, the magic power that some way into the book Jaya suddenly finds herself having is the power to glance into others' minds, people around her, and she can suddenly kind of read their thoughts or even see what they're thinking. That's her magic power, and it suddenly activates one morning. And initially, of course, like anyone else, she thinks she's going crazy. But so, for example, she's kind of on the metro. Not only is she on the way to the metro station going to work, not only is she aware of thoughts people are thinking, once she's on the metro platform, she's suddenly aware far more than before, or to an even greater extent than before, the extent to which different men passing her, in passing, regard her sexually, you know, as a sexual object, standing there, or different sexual attributes. And then she's in the back of an Uber, and, you know, suddenly she feels this incredible hostility coming from the male cab driver. And again, it seems to be for no other reason than that she's a kind of confident-seeming woman going about her day. And so I felt like I have to remember that more than creating her from the inside. I felt I could do, but I felt it's a really different act of navigation for a woman in an Indian setting, or perhaps elsewhere as well, to pass through a public place and the gazes upon them. I had to be more mindful of that difference than of creating them from the inside. That felt that I could do that. So
you did a great job.
Oh, thank you.
And I loved the way you could see people's thoughts. It was such a fun idea.
Oh, thank you.
All the people she encountered.
Right.
No, I really enjoyed that. And Helen, you had to step into the shoes of a 17-year-old. Can you explain why you decided to tell the story through a teenager's eyes and whether that felt natural?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the choice came down to whether it was going to be a young adult novel. I did briefly consider making Kelsey older, but I didn't feel I could tell the same story with an adult character because I had initially come up with the idea when I was a teenager myself. As for whether it felt natural, I think I find it easier to write child and teenage characters than I do adults. And I usually say the reason is that I never entirely became an adult myself. But I guess it's also I do, because I work with kids, I do spend more time with children than I do with adults. And also when I was writing Broken Silence, I was in a writing group that had two 16-year-olds in it, so I was getting that feedback immediately. One of the, some of the things are quite shaped by the fact that she is a teenager. I think there are elements of the story where an adult would maybe behave a bit more rationally, but I think it adds something to it that it's not an adult going through these things. And I do also, I like the stories that are told with teenagers because everything is quite black and white when you're a teenager, and everything does feel a lot more life and death before you bring into it the life and death of the serial killer plot.
Yeah.
So it felt more natural to do that than it would with adults, I guess.
Yeah, they're a lot more vulnerable than...
Yeah. I think having a character who could just leave the city, it adds something when as you say, vulnerability, but the less agency and choice in your life as a teenager, that you are dependent on other people's decisions, and also other people's interpretations of your actions. That I think if some of these things had been happening to an adult, there wouldn't have been that response of, oh, that's just Kelsey being dramatic. They would have been like, okay, something is clearly very wrong here immediately, whereas to give the freedom for people to not recognise what was happening.
Yeah, and I can relate to that because I have in my previous novel an 11-year-old narrator, and that came really naturally, which makes me think I didn't grow up either. Just a natural voice for me.
Yeah.
Raj, if we can talk a little bit about your novel and why you chose to use a supernatural element.
Oh, yeah. Well,
because that's quite a big part of your story.
It is. I should say that initially it appears wholly supernatural, and gradually you realize it might be apparently supernatural, and there might be some incredibly advanced technology at work. Who controls the technology and to what purpose is part of the mystery. But I think that's part of it. So the first part of that is, I have always been drawn to a very wide range of ways of telling a story, but including very much stories with supernatural or magical realist elements. But when the supernatural element or the magical realist element is somehow used to shed a new light on the real, rather than to escape from the real. I have no problem with people who enjoy, writing that kind of escapes from realism, but I specifically really enjoy when the supernatural or when the apparently magical sheds a new light on the real. So for example, just to give you one classic example would be Kafka's The Metamorphosis, when someone wakes up, a young man wakes up transformed into a giant insect. Now, Kafka actually kind of piles on the realism by making you feel what it is like to inhabit a giant beetle's body with 8 legs, and even the process of trying to get out of bed and onto the floor, you know. But at the same time, anybody who for one reason or another, it could be illness, it could be accident, it could be aging, it could be just not feeling at home in your own body for another reason. Anybody who feels trapped within a body that does not feel theirs will relate. And you know, the magical element in the writing kind of really brings out that truth of what it is suddenly not to feel at home in your own body. You know, and that's something that's a very real dimension to many lives in many situations. You know, so that's what I mean by an apparently supernatural element kind of being used to shed new light on the real. You know, and another thing about the supernatural that I really love is that it can really make you feel how we subjectively experience reality. So for example, you know, objectively, right now we are occupying a room of certain dimensions, and that's the kind of external, what the CCTV will capture. But depending on what any one of us is going through at this moment, unknown things or things happening in our life, the subjective experience of a particular moment can be very different. You can feel as though you're in a long tunnel without end. I hope no one is. But this conversation, when will I get my dinner? You know, but I hope no one is. But using the supernatural or the magical in your writing, what if instead of metaphorically speaking of a tunnel, you put the reader in that tunnel? You say there is a tunnel. So I just feel, one of the things I feel is the way we subjectively experience realities at different moments is surprisingly close to the magical, and magic realism can sometimes bring that out more powerfully than straightforward realism. That's the second. And the final thing specific to Shakti is that there were external reasons for employing supernatural elements, which is, one being, you know, I'm writing about a particular kind of government, which right now we don't have only in India. We've very recently had it in the US. We have it in other countries as well, where there are particular regimes in power that are not just there to maintain their hold on political power. No, their project in their particular country is somewhat deeper. Their project is to change the way their citizens feel about their country. Their project is to enter the fears and the hopes of, and you know, through social media, through their speeches, it's to go somewhere darker and deeper than merely winning the next election. We can all think of regimes like that, you know, Trump was doing that in several speeches. We have that in India right now. So it is actually a government that is trying to go into some really dark places in the hopes and dreams of their citizens. And what they managed to get hold of is the other realm, which until recently we would have classified as supernatural, but we have technology that with the amassing of data about us is able to predict us, is able to mirror us to such an uncanny extent that we've all had this experience when we've been speaking about something and that pops up as an ad on our Facebook feed, you know. So what happens when governments who are on a transformational project suddenly have access to technology that appears to kind of read the minds of citizens, and that convergence starts to happen between amazing technological possibility and a government seeking profound ideological control, which almost starts to feel uncannily supernatural. So that's also another reason why I felt the supernatural would be kind of an important way of telling this story. So,
thank you. And Rodney, your novel is probably the closest of the three to a traditional crime novel, just in the sense that the main character is a former con artist who still fancies herself as a mystery solver. Why did you decide to set your book and series in a retirement village with an elderly detective? And what attributes does a 97-year-old grandmother bring to the story?
So to answer that, I really need to take a step back and understand where Alice came from. So the other cozy mystery series that I wrote has a slightly paranormal twist. And the very first book of there, Alice appeared in as Amanda, so I talked about her in my reading just before, her grandmother. And Alice was really in it for probably 3 pages tops. And Oliver and Amanda are the main characters for that other series. But when I got to book 3 in that other series, I wanted to mix things up. So I dropped Amanda, but I also wanted to have a character that could act as a foil for Oliver. And so I thought, well, why not write Alice? She was a bit of fun to write for these 3 pages. So I wrote her in, and I was able to flesh her out a little bit more, and had great fun writing her. And so, sorry, going back to she was introduced as living at the Silver Moon Retirement Village when she was first introduced. So I already had that setting in mind. And so I had so much fun writing her in the 3rd book of that series. I thought, well, she's almost demanding to have her own book. So I wrote it sitting there, and she, there's the fun about writing a character that old is that she doesn't care what other people think. She's at that age where if she wants to tell someone that they're being a sod, she'll tell them that they're being a sod. And she has no problem with that. In fact, she kind of feels like she has to rein that in sometimes, because some of these people are her friends and she doesn't want to annoy them all. But it's really kind of liberating writing a character like that, because the retirement villages is kind of an enclosed environment. And so you come up with against the same characters every story that you do in it. So you kind of get the sense of who's afraid of her and who's kind of amused by her, and where she sort of fits in that regime. And suddenly she's taken on this new lease of life, and she wants to sort of take Vanessa on as a protege, really. And she has this interest in what happens. So the environment was almost created by her first appearance, and then and her age as well was really necessary for the plot of that first book that she was in. So I couldn't make her any younger or suddenly de-age her by 20 years, because it was already set. And so it kind of just developed from there, really.
Okay, she's a really fun character. Helen, Broken Silence has an intriguing premise where the main character, Kelsey, who you introduced earlier, receives phone calls from a stranger who seems to know everything about her, where she goes, what she's doing, the people she loves, which is really quite terrifying, especially when the stranger starts to threaten those who are close to her, including her brother. Can you tell us about the origin of that idea? You said you had it 10 years before.
Yeah, so my high school best friend and I had, she was sleeping over, and we watched Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer, and I think there was a 3rd one, but I can't remember what it was. And then I want to write my own one. And so that night I came up with this idea, and I told it to my friend, and she just thought it was the most amazing thing ever. And then I did nothing with it until I was in my 20s, but it had always stayed with me. And every few years, my friend would bring it up and go, "Are you going to write that? Are you going to make a film? Can I star in it?" And so when I did finally go to write it, I did have to re-watch Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer, and read the book of I Know What You Did Last Summer as well. So I was very much going into it with that thriller plot style in mind. Yeah.
And without giving anything away, did you know who the caller was when you started? Or did you discover it as you wrote?
Didn't back then, when I first came up with the story, but before I started writing, I did. And I sat down and I wanted to have 5 suspects. Readers have found more than 5 suspects. But I had 5 in mind, and I was very clear I wanted all of them to have motivations. And I also wanted all of them to be somewhat likable, so that it would be, whoever it was going to be believable, but it was also going to be slightly heartbreaking in a way. Not all of them did end up being likable. There's at least one who was not. But yeah, that I did spend quite a bit of time on fleshing out those 5 characters. There was a wee wobble in the middle of writing where I almost changed my mind, but I did stick with my original plan. But there was I wrote about 5 chapters where it was somebody else, and then I deleted them and went back to my original plan.
Okay. Thank you, Helen. I do have a few more questions, but I'm conscious of time, and I'm wondering whether any members of the audience want to ask any of our panelists.
You're aching to ask questions. So, it'd be difficult to age your 97-year-old. So, and I'm just thinking of very long series where the main characters stay the same age, as well as very long series where the main characters and their families are just like us, you know, they're just normally. So, do you see that in the course of your book, your character either ages or changes or develops in some way that it makes them different at the end of the book than they were at the beginning of the book?
Me. I tend to write books that take place over a fairly short space of time. I struggle to have something happen. I think for the type of plots I do, once the plot gets going, it carries on, and it's a matter of weeks rather than months. But I am not with this book, with another book. I am now writing a sequel, and having to have like the logistics of a pregnancy and working out the time frame and how the character would change. And I am finding I'm having to think a lot more about that, because I'm slipping back into them having the same insecurities and going, well, they might still have that insecurity, but a year later they would be looking at it in a different way. It would be different things causing that. So yeah, I guess does have to change over time, but more across series rather than books for me personally.
Well, I've painted myself into a corner by having a 97-year-old.
How many books have you written so far?
So there's 3 in that series. In my defence, I didn't know how popular she was going to be, but she is by far and away the most popular character that my readers enjoy. So I sort of circumnavigated that a little bit by the second book, Cut Plus Me. There's lots of flashbacks to her as a younger age when she was, a working con artist. But they do tend to be, like Helen, they do tend to be over a very short space of time, which is rapidly developing the retirement village into being the most dangerous place in Wellington to live. But, but there will be a natural conclusion too, at some point. I'm already sort of thinking about what can I do to work around that. Maybe do a little bit more of her in her youth and stuff, but I'm not quite ready to let go of her just yet.
Oh, thank you for the question. It's really, in some ways, it asks us about the kind of limits of in a way, what literature can show, and also what we can achieve as individuals, by which I mean, you know, without giving anything specific away about the plot of Shakti, both near the end of Shakti, in which the character goes through, in actually a short time, about 10 or 11 days, the characters go through an enormous amount. And then more recently, a short story of mine that appeared, in which a young woman over a period of a few months gets married and goes through an enormous awareness of what her husband has plunged her into, or what her husband is involved in. And it's fair to say that in both cases, the protagonists are quite heroic, you know, against enormous odds. But it is important to say that they are against enormous odds, and I feel that's what I meant by saying sometimes the limits of what an individual story can show and where an individual life can lead is something I come up against in my recent work, by which I mean sometimes an individual can be working at the outer limits of the integrity, the openness, and the courage expected of them. But they come up against forces so powerful, you know, and so impossible for any one of us to dislodge that, you know, we almost can only show, literature is often focused on individual stories, right? So we can only show an individual working at the kind of limits of her abilities and trying her best to encompass this reality and do something about it or against it. But we also, in order to kind of be honest and maybe not tell a fairy tale where one individual, or a superhero story where one individual can put the entire world to rights, you also have to show that they change, they open, they try their utmost, but the forces that are arrayed against them, or the structures that are arrayed against them, are incredibly powerful and impossible for any one person to dislodge. So that kind of a sense of truth and a sense of reality forces me in this book and in other writing to concede that, even though the individuals do change. So they come up against really powerful harms, but which is not to say that they should give up that struggle, you know, to be their bravest self.
That was a good question, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask? Well, I think I should ask a final question, which is what's next for you, Helen? What are you working on at the moment?
So I've just released this week a children's book called There's No Such Thing as Humans. And what I'm working on at the moment, so I had a book as part of the Witchy Fiction Collective, which was a group of us during lockdown, all wrote cozy, witchy, fun mysteries. So I'm working on the sequel to that one, which is all about assistance dogs and witches and magic and ghosts and all very silly and fluffy and fun. So quite different to the serial killers. But I like the balance. Yeah.
And Rodney, is it another Silver Moon?
No, so the third Silver Moon, Knitting Needles and Knives, came out a couple of months ago. So I've just finished a manuscript which is another murder mystery, but it's set in small town America. So I've sent that off to one of my readers to see whether my vast experience of watching lots of TV is what small town America actually is like. I'm hoping she's like, okay, I can go, what have you been drinking? So that will be out in a couple of months, and then I'm working on the 5th book in my other murder mystery series, and then once that's done, I'll go back to Silver Moon again. And see what I can bring out of Alice.
And how about you, Raj?
Well, I'm currently working on a short fiction collection, but after Shakti, I finished a novel, which I'm also at the moment kind of trying to sell. So I'm trying to use it to get myself a new agent who will then hopefully represent it. But lots of things, especially outside New Zealand, have been dramatically slowed by the pandemic. You know, and so that process is taking quite a while. But what is interesting about that book is that I found, you know, like Shakti for me turned out to be a kind of coming out of sorts, by which I mean I found that I enjoyed kind of writing on that supernatural plane so much that that the next book is kind of even more so. And in a way, you know, the next book is a coming out of sorts, except it's sometimes the coming out is not about, or not only about your sexuality or aspects of your sexuality. You can come out about other sides to yourself that you've never shown in public before. And I think that book, while being a novel, and very often to tell certain truths, I need the masks of novels in order to kind of be more candid about myself than I could be in nonfiction. That book kind of shares that actually my sense of the supernatural is deeper rooted than I've ever admitted in public before. And I'm not just this rational person who sees and measures everything. And you know, it's a kind of coming out that I've never really shared that side of myself in a story. So that's what's special to me about that book, that I kind of admit that I believe in fairies of a sort, you know, and have done for a long time. So that's what that book is. So if it ever sees the light of day and finds a publisher, hopefully I'll be able to share it with you. So
that sounds great. Well, thank you, Helen, Rodney, and Raj, for writing these books and giving us some insight into your storytelling. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight.
please join me in thanking Jennifer for this.